Okay, my good friends, good afternoon and a hearty welcome to Congregation Nishmat Am's Adult Education Premier Speaker Series. I would ask that you please mute yourselves, please. My name is Yitzchak Cohen. I'm the proud rabbi of this wonderful, wonderful congregation. And today's lecture is the fifth in this provocative and engaging series featuring scholars from around the world. We had scholars from Israel and from Italy, and on topics relevant to our Jewish community. Following the lecture, there will be a Q&A moderated by the master himself, Dr. David Patterson. Please forward all questions and comments in the chat box to Dr. Patterson. My friends, today we're privileged to have with us as our distinguished speaker, Reid, truly a man who needs no introduction, who is well known to the Dallas Metroplex and beyond. Reid will speak on not good alone, on the limits of love, family, and friendship. Reid Heller is an attorney, a well-known attorney, practicing in Dallas for 38 years. He has been active, extremely active in adult Jewish education for decades, leading classic Jewish text seminars and lecturing for the Melton School. Reid has been active in many, many Jewish organizations, still is. He is a proud husband, father, grandfather, and a member of Congregation Nishmat Am. And he is a person I'm so proud to call a wonderful, wonderful friend. He will bring examples from the Bible and rabbinic traditions in his lectures. I can't wait to hear him. And so without further ado, as we say, it's my honor and great privilege to introduce to you today our guest presenter, Dr. Reid Heller. I made you a doctor, it's okay. Reid Heller.
I'm not a doctor, but thank you very much, Yitz. I'm honored to be asked by you and by David, people I look up to highly. I'm delighted to see so many people here that I know and love, my family, friends, and also Luis, who I'm delighted to have attend this. Luis has special interest and knowledge in the Greek aspect of the portion of the talk that I'll be addressing. So this talk was written for Morton Meyerson, friend and Chavruta, study partner. And the lead quote with which I begin is something that comes from Leonard Cohen. It was spontaneous utterance, but I liked it and I thought it was appropriate for this. May you be surrounded by family and friends all your life, but if this is not your lot, may the blessing find you in your solitude. Talk 1. This is the first of 6 talks, only doing one tonight. This is the introduction to a series on this theme. Conventional views of isolation and relationship. The word isolation in the past year has become synonymous with pandemic. It seems like a hardship or worse, a curse. Most of us long for an end to isolation and a return to ordinary life, meaning the presence of others, family, friends, even the press of anonymous crowds. The interior state accompanying isolation is loneliness. Loneliness seems like an honest hunger, an interior state arising from the absence of some essential good. So what is the essential good? Is it the traditional forms of relationship like family, love, friendship? Could it be something more fundamental? This talk will explore our fear of isolation and attempt to discover its proper place in the life of all human beings. We will also contrast the ancient Greek and Hebrew views of conventional relationships to understand whether relationships are good or even sufficient in themselves to overcome isolation. I hope to show that isolation is an inescapable aspect of human nature, and that in the views of the Greeks and the Jews, human relationships are deeply flawed. Themselves, they are the cause of much pain we experience in ordinary life. Isolation and human relationship actually live in a dynamic tension, and each of them has a claim on us. And I will show that this is a view that is at the heart of the Hebrew Bible. One obvious paradox we find in the tension between isolation and relationship is the way most human relationships at times produce a longing for solitude, no less intense than the isolation produces a longing for relationship. So let's begin our exploration of isolation with a brief etymology. The word isolation is derived from the Latin word insula, meaning literally in the salt sea. That is an island. An oft-quoted stanza in the English canon is John Donne's, the 17th century poet theologian, his Meditation 17, which contrasts islands and continents as metaphors for isolation and relationship. Donne says, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." In this fragment of a well-known prose poem, I understand Donne to comfort readers with a platitude that we were all connected by a common fate. Our perceived isolation is a defect in understanding and in fact an illusion. By the way, Stanley, are we recording this? Okay. For Donne, the connection we share as human beings is at bottom tragic. He sums up our human condition with these well-known words, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Now, can anyone say that on any given day in the last 400 years that this exercise in logic has ever quelled a single pang of loneliness? The argument's form appeals to the intellect, but it really comes home to roost in feelings of self-pity that Donne disguises as empathy. Donne's goal is to shake us out of complacent delusions of immortality that are closely linked to an enduring sense of isolation from others. Now, Donne was a clergyman, but it is remarkable, I think, that he chose a geographical metaphor for connection when the Bible has identified the profoundest forms of human relationship in the common descent, in the common descent of all human beings from Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. I'll be using those terms, or sometimes I'll call Adam the man throughout the paper. But Donne was not so much concerned with assuaging loneliness, rather in connecting all creatures through the inescapable terror of death. For Donne, the theologian, the primary source for that view would be chapter 4 of Genesis, where Adam, the man, and Chava, Eve, are ejected from the garden and cursed with death, among other kinds of suffering, including lust, painful childbirth, and strenuous labor. Donne's interpretation of Eros and death touches the core of the Christian understanding of Genesis, wherein the curse can only be reversed through a savior and a perfect sacrifice. I'm saying all of this because this is the atmosphere, the general worldview in which the even Jewish self-understanding is often derived from. Salvation in this life is unthinkable. Redemption is achieved only in the next world. But this is not the Jewish way of reading Genesis or the Hebrew Bible in general. The Jewish way of reading, as I hope to show, reveals profound truths about human nature, including innate feelings of isolation. In order to look more closely at the Jewish understanding of the text, let's turn to Genesis chapter 2, the second account of the creation of human beings. And we begin with a section I call the wasteland and the garden. A popular misconception about the creation of Adam and Chava is that both were formed in the Garden of Eden. A closer look at the text reveals something else. The human being, Adam, was formed prior to Eden, from misted earth in an unwatered wasteland. The man opened his eyes for the first time on a bleak and dusty plain. Only later did the Creator plant the Garden of Eden in the east. Once planted, the Creator plucked the man from the wasteland and placed him there in Eden. Simon Schama, in a beautiful book called Landscape and Memory, argued that the evocative feeling that wells up in us from time to time when we are in foreign landscapes sometimes echo memories of distant places where our ancestors once lived. I don't think Schama was entirely original here. He was arguing from older models, including a literal reading of Genesis that suggests our oldest shared memory as human beings are memories of isolation in a desert waste. If you have never felt a deep connection to desertscapes, there is a text in Genesis to remind you. It is certainly our first collective memory, according to Genesis, but it is not our only first memory. After the man's placement in the garden, the Creator observes, "Not good is it for Adam to be alone." So what does not good mean? Well, after making all the other creatures on days 5 and 6 in such a way that they can procreate, male and female, the Creator saw all that he had created and that it was good. In Genesis 2, the ability to procreate is missing only in the case of man. So the Creator completes the man as other animals and fashions for him an ezer kenegdo, meaning something much more profound than helper or assistant, which is the King James type translation. The phrase suggests a fellow creature to support and sustain in the most fundamental sense. That is, one who prevents him from utter collapse and destruction, like a buttress on a building that requires reinforcement. In this tiny phrase, the Torah announces a new kind of relational ideal that we will explore throughout the talk. Next, in an ironic turn, the Creator performs what today might be called a cesarean section on the man, who then gives birth to the first woman, Chava, feminine for life. Here we have an inversion of the universal pagan myth that elevates the feminine reproductive power to the celestial heights. But to sacralize a natural function like fertility, or the sun, for example, as the source and creator of light, is contrary to the biblical thinking about the unity of the universe and a single transcendent creator of all nature. When Chava's eyes first opened, she looked upon a lush and beautiful garden. In addition to the garden, her eyes rested on a fellow human being, the man. As descendants of both the man and Chava, all offspring of the first humans inherited two first memories that they are deeply imprinted in human nature. The man's first memory of bleak isolation and Chava's memory of companionship in a verdant garden. These dueling first memories seem to me to be profound reflections on the deepest experience of life. One, on the one hand, bleak isolation, and on the other hand, companionship amidst abundance. Each of these first memories is humanity's ancient land. Some of you may hear in this account a slight echo of another account recorded in a work by the Greek sage Plato called the Symposium. In the Symposium, One participant, the comic playwright Aristophanes, explains the origin of human erotic longing in similar but comic parallel to Genesis. In Aristophanes' account, human beings were created as androgynes. And here's an example of an androgyne. This is from an ancient Greek vase. You see human beings connected back to back, male and female. In some cases, it could be male and male or female, which would explain their mutual erotic attractions. Okay, so this is the ancient Greek conception of the androgyne appearing in Plato's Symposium. The androgynes offended the gods and were therefore split in two, constantly chasing one another in order to couple and thereby return to their original form. The story of the androgynes seems similar to the story of the creation of Eve, but embodies a particularly low view of human nature, which Plato will elsewhere in the Symposium try to correct. Contrary to Aristophanes, who is mouthing the conventional Greek understanding of relationship as erotic fulfillment, eros, a word that bears a close connection to the word for strife in Greek, eris, Chava and Adam do not couple in order to overcome the wound of the split between them, as in the Greek story. They are separate creatures, isolated, but joined in a shared enterprise to soften the extremes of isolation. Hence the words, "It is not good for man to be alone." That enterprise involves the creation of a specific kind of family, a people, a nation, and finally the collective experience of all aspects of human existence: hunger, wandering, exile, enslavement, liberation, and wandering once again, culminating in a new way of life that has something to do with divine law. I would summarize the differences between the Greeks and the Jews at this point in our talk in two Greek words that are identical except for a single vowel: eros and erotic longing, love, and eris, strife. Eros and eris. This is the traditional Greek ideal captured in the poems of Homer. For Jews, the ideal path is neither love nor strife. It is relationship and mutual aid, and we will look more closely at how these differences shape and distort our views of human relations down to our own time. And the next section is on family, love, and friendship. And I begin with an introduction to the problem that I'm going to go through each. There is nothing comparable in all of Greek literature to the account of Adam and Chava. There are myths like Hesiod's account of Prometheus forming human beings from the earth, and Pandora's curiosity, which leads her to open a forbidden box, releasing evil into the world. Genesis is, of course, aware of all these universal myths, yet there is nothing comparable to its teaching about our essential aloneness and the fundamental human relationship based on the desire to support, to save, and sustain those around us. That is why, for the Greeks, the highest literary form is tragedy. The form of existence that isolated human beings struggling to their death against the universe experience. And Judaism's highest literary form, by way of contrast, is the Bible with its optimistic realism about the possibility of human improvement through education and law. And this is how I account for Genesis' indifference to the term describing all the usual forms of human relationships: spouses, parent-child, friend. The only name given to describe Adam and Chava's relationship is Ezer Kenegdo, something stronger than helper, closer to one who sustains or saves. So what are we to make of this first human relationship? The man gives birth, so to speak, to Chava. So she is, in the words of the man, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And from that point of view, the man and Chava are one flesh, or to use a term from modern science, clones, not androgynes. Additionally, They are equally brother and sister and father-daughter, meaning close family in a prohibited relationship for reproduction under Jewish law. But they are also the first reproductive couple. So as the modern saying goes, where is the love? The word love appears nowhere in these chapters. And as we will see in a moment, where the word does appear to describe human relationships, it is used very ambiguously. Again, the only relational phrase in this chapter is ezer kenegdo. Were they friends? The term friendship nowhere appears in the Torah. And as we'll see in a moment, the Torah is suspicious, if not hostile, to Greek notions of friendship, though this does change in the era of the rabbis under the influence of Greek culture. And I've got, if any of you want this paper with all my references, I'm not going to give them to you now. You're welcome. I'll be happy to send it on to you. All we know is that the man was created in isolation as in an act of kindness. The woman was formed from his side to save him from isolation, meaning destruction. Though they are one flesh and live in relationship, they are distinct both before and after the expulsion from the garden. They are alone together in the difficult work of survival, both for themselves and their children, united only by a relationship founded on mutual aid, the concept of ezer kenegdo. Now we move on to each of the forms of relationship. And the first one I want to address is family. Family is no solution to isolation. And in fact, it's a breeding ground for the worst human excesses. The first familial term one finds in Genesis is son, and immediately thereafter, brother. The reference is to the first human offspring, Cain and Hevel. Literally, breath, something transitory, empty, in vain, and akin to meaninglessness. After their sacrifices, the Creator asked Cain, "Where is your brother Hevel?" As we know, Cain has murdered Hevel. From this introduction of the concept of family, though not the word, the Torah teaches us to expect anything and everything within families. It wastes no time introducing the possibility of violence and murder, especially in families. But before killing Hevel, the Creator admonishes Cain. Error, fault, or sin, chatat, crouches at the door, but you may master it. Here's a small opening for self-legislation, but in Cain's case, the seed falls on dry ground. It is interesting to note that the term family, mishpacha, appears nowhere in the Cain and Hevel narrative. It first appears generations later in Genesis 8:19, and it has nothing to do with human beings. It refers to groupings of creatures that Noah sends forth from the ark after the flood, establishing the Torah's view that family is simply a way of ordering all living things, not a specifically human or sacral thing. It is not a uniquely human bond. Now we turn to the word love. Okay, this is going to be a longer section. There's a lot more to say about it. Today, we are accustomed to see love as the opposite of isolation, as well as its cure. As important as the word love from Aleph He Vav may be, for example, its use in the Shema, you shall love the Lord with all your heart, etc., in Deuteronomy 6:5, the word love arrives rather late in Genesis. It paradoxically makes its first appearance in chapter 22:2, the narrative known as the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. Please, I'm quoting now from Torah, please, or in Hebrew, na, take, kach, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering, an olah, on one of the heights which I point out to you. The term burnt offering, ola, from the root referring to elevation, as in the smoke of the burnt sacrifice, in the Akedah strongly contrasts with the first offering, mincha, a simple offering placed on an altar used in Genesis 4 in connection with Cain and Hevel. A mincha is often, though not always, a bloodless sacrifice. The term used for Hevel's offering in Genesis 4 can be read either as fat or milk, chalav, right? It's a very interesting play. Josephus, the first century Jewish general and historian, states in his Antiquities of the Jews in chapter 2 that Hevel's offering meant milk. So it wasn't a burnt offering. It was just something placed on an altar. Why the association with these sacrifices? Well, listen, and please concentrate on this because a lot is built on it. The offerings of Cain and Hevel introduce monumental themes in regard to the best form of life, which we know from Genesis 2 is mutual aid. This idea of kenegdo, ezer kenegdo. There is no need to look deeply into the souls of Cain and Hevel. The deepest things are reflected right there in the nature of the offerings themselves. Each offering is connected to a particular way of life. Simply put, Cain's offering, the product of farming, is associated with city life. In the Cain and Hevel narrative, the text explicitly connects agriculture, cities, and murder. So where does the text mention cities? After the murder, Cain flees to a place of aimless wandering, Nod, where he founds the first city, naming it after his son Enoch, or in Josephus's account, Nod. The modern songwriter Bob Dylan repeatedly uses the land of Nod in his songs or poems as the mythical city where human evil and confusion reigns. In contrast to Cain, Hevel's shepherd's life is solitary and focused on the care and well-being of the animals in his charge, a task that instills the fundamental biblical virtue of mutuality that he learned from his mother Chava. For more on this subject, I'll refer you now to Leo Strauss's collected essays, Jewish Philosophy and the Crisis of Modernity, and specifically page 388 of his essay, Jerusalem and Athens. Regarding the murderous origins of the Greek city-states, refer you to Burckhardt, The Greeks and Greek Civilization. Cities are places, are dangerous places, and Jews and the Bible in particular have struggled mightily with how to redeem them. Returning to the Akedah, Abraham leaves the city, Ur of the Chaldees, seemingly in imitation of Hevel's wandering form of life, but at the command of the deity only within the boundaries of the land of Israel. And in the course of wandering, we find that this chapter on the Akedah, the most mysterious narrative in all of Genesis, the word love appears paradoxically in connection with a command from the deity to sacrifice his only son, the one you love. And the mystery deepens because the narrative uses human love for something that goes beyond human understanding of the word. The Akedah introduces the possibility of human love of the highest, the divine, but this is going to require some unpacking. The traditional rabbinic understanding of Abraham's virtue is obedience to a commandment based on Genesis' use of the verb take, kach. The philosophical Jewish commentators, on the other hand, emphasize Abraham's freedom and knowing. And by knowing, Maimonides understands love. He explicitly says this in the Guide of the Perplexed, section 3 or volume 3, book 24. Behind Maimonides' line of speculation, though never cited, lurks the commentaries of the founder of Platonic Jewish philosophy, not to mention all Christian theology, Philo of Alexandria. In Philo's work on Abraham, and I have the passages here in the paper, we find that Abraham's greatest virtue in the Akedah is not obedience, rather a knowing love of the divine. The modern commentator, Professor Robert D. Sachs, in his commentary of The Lion and the Ass, offers grammatical support for this philosophical interpretation of the Akedah by focusing on the particle na. In Hebrew, it's an unusual particle, but ordinarily has a pleading or polite type questioning quality to it. It's a soft word to implore a friend and often a superior. Na is Sachs observes that there is no place in Torah where the creator uses na to address another human being. Both Rashi and the 15th century Sephardi philosopher Albo also draw attention to the na. Albo, for example, explains Abraham as the subject and object of the creator's test, meaning God is not trying to figure out what Abraham's going to do. He wants Abraham to think through the problem and experience the outcome on his own, meaning the creator wants Abraham to discover and experience free will, which knowledge Maimonides understands as the highest love. The 3-day journey to Mount Moriah, where the sacrifice will be made, is to give Abraham time to contemplate, know, and choose, so that it is clear there is no divine compulsion. And this I take from Nechama Leibovich and her studies on Genesis. The Akedah is thus the account of Abraham's discovery of love of the divine, the highest thing associated with knowledge. This new form of love is a continuity with human love, one that binds together heaven and earth. Making the journey to Mount Moriah is then an account of the soul's ascent, the biblical counterpart to Socrates' speech in the Symposium about a ladder of love that connects the human and the divine. The Kabbalists are very direct on this point. For example, Nachmanides portrays Abraham as the greatest teacher of love in the Holy Letter. Many medieval poets also emphasize this theme, including a Shabbat hymn still sung today, and all of you know it, Yedid Nefesh, the soul's friend or beloved, and it refers to Abraham. This philosophical and Jewish folks and Kabbalists implicitly connect the Akedah with the mysterious command in Deuteronomy 6:5 to love the Lord with all your heart. The standard commentaries read the Akedah, however, as extolling obedience and martyrdom. This is a very different way to view it. It's very difficult for me, but I think very necessary for us to hear this because it is replete in the philosophical and Kabbalistic literature. And it assumes that it's understood, but it's rarely explained. If we can say that this first slaying of Hevel was the elevation of meaninglessness, meaninglessness is transformed in the Akedah, also an account of a near slaying, into an olah, an ascent via burnt offering, but really a metaphor for the soul's ascent. Although the Akedah is often described as a polemic against human sacrifice, it is neither sermon nor polemic. In fact, it is closer to the narrative of Cain and Hevel, an argument from action whose psychological detail can only be inferred. And I'm drawing that from Nechama Leibovich, citing a man named Auerbach, a great literary scholar in her studies in Bereshit. But the Akedah's account of the highest love is not the last word. From the heights of the Akedah, Genesis descends into a more conventional understanding of love and its peculiar threat to our understanding of the world, ourselves, and even human survival. The word love reappears in Genesis 27:14, the scene in which Rivka cooks a dish that Isaac loves. Isaac loves in order to convince the blind Isaac that he is blessing his favorite son Esau, when in fact he is blessing Jacob. In contrast to the majesty of the Kedah, the word love is now connected exclusively with sensual appetite and, more importantly, deception and illusion. We saw how Plato juxtaposes Aristophanes' tale of the androgynes with Socrates' speech about the ladder of love in the Symposium. Likewise, Genesis juxtaposes Jacob's all too human love with Abraham's exalted standard in the Akedah. And this episode is not the last time Jacob will be connected to deception born of love. Jacob is haunted for the rest of his life by love and deceit. So, for example, Jacob's uncle Laban deceives him by switching Leah for Rachel on his wedding night. Later, the beloved Rachel is taken from Jacob a second time, dying while giving birth to a second son, Benjamin. And Jacob's love for Joseph creates endless problems for him and Joseph's brother. He surrenders to perpetual mourning when his children convince him, lying, that his beloved Joseph has been killed and eaten by wild beasts. Love, the strongest and most valued of human connections, is mired in deception and misery. And this does not end with Jacob. His children are likewise confronted with deception when they appear before Joseph, unrecognizable in the costume of a high Egyptian official. And in the midst of a series of love deceptions involving Jacob's son, there is the mysterious narrative of Judah and Tamar, disguised as a prostitute in Genesis 38, which is orchestrated once again by a woman to ensure the survival of the line of Judah and the continuity of the Jewish people. The forms of love in the Jacob narrative contrast sharply with the supernal love alluded to in the Abraham narratives, especially the Akedah, but also Deuteronomy 6:5, thou shalt love the Lord, etc. Now we turn to friendship and two shorter sections. Our last relationship that is elevated as the solution to isolation is friendship. In the Bible's view, it is the most complex and potentially dangerous of all relationships. Hence, the Bible is utterly silent about it. It is the intimate bond formed entirely by love, unregulated by family ties, marriage, or law. The Torah has no single word for friendship in this sense, but hints at it using words for uncle, dod, and neighbor, rea. Most importantly, there are no clear cases of friendship in the Torah. There are obligation relationships based on gifts or services performed for people, such as Joseph and Pharaoh's cupbearer, but the relationships are ephemeral, without intimacy, unlike the relationships we idealize between parents and children, husbands and wives. In latter biblical literature, one finds friendship in two marvelous but contrasting relationships, David and Jonathan and Ruth and Naomi. In the case of David and Jonathan, the relationship culminates in Jonathan's betrayal of his father Saul and Jonathan's tragic death. In the case of Ruth and Naomi, the close bonds between two unrelated women lead to the embrace of Judaism by a non-Jew who begets the line of David, the once and future king, the stock of the Messiah. Thus, friendship in later Jewish history is paradoxically connected to redemption, but there is no hint of this in Torah, and one senses in the book of Ruth an innovation. Today, we might call Ruth's love of Naomi part of her tshuva, her conversion to Judaism. In that sense, conversion reformulates lawless friendship by bringing the friends within the boundaries of Jewish law. We will return to friendship in the next section in connection with the role of friendship for Greeks. For more on friendship, and I cite an excellent source for it. Okay, now contrasting social bonds in Greek and Jewish worldviews. The view that isolation is the opposite of traditional relationships, meaning a great evil to overcome, is a legacy of the Greeks and their tragic view of life. Nevertheless, Jews and Greeks show surprising similarities when it comes to their understanding of the enduring aspects of human nature, isolation, and our subjection to forces beyond our control. The Greek and Hebraic views differ in their ways in which we address that common enduring human situation. and those differences account for the ancient and mysterious tensions between the Greek and biblical views that form our Western sensibility. The highest good for the ordinary Greek is summarized in Plato's Republic as the ability to do good for one's friends and do harm to one's enemies. It's the Republic, Book 1, 332. The concept of friendship, philia, is deeply rooted in the Greek social experience and contemplates people outside of one's clan with whom one is joining in common purpose to enlarge strength and confront one's enemies. The ability to make friends expands our power to control our fortunes. But friendships, as all forms of relationship, are not permanent and produce dependencies that are vulnerable to deception. Not all friends are equal. Not all friends are reliable. And false friends intentionally deceive. There is a political dimension to the concept of friendship, and ultimately it is the Greek idea of friendship that is the basis of the political arts, as Xenophon stresses in the study of King Cyrus known as the Chiropedia. What's more, one way to understand Platonic philosophy is as an elevated form of friendship wherein isolated individuals form relationships built around the love of truth. This kind of friendship is what we call philosophical. Those who practice it may in time become philosophers. By way of contrast, the Torah has little to say about political arts. Though there are very great political figures in the Torah, Abraham, Joseph, Moses, each of them exhibits extraordinary skills in the political arts: warfare, diplomacy, independence, service to powerful kings, and leadership. But the Jewish worldview does not elevate the political art. Rather, it elevates character traits, especially piety, meaning submission to and love of the Creator within a covenantal relationship. Where the Jews speak of providential covenant, a Creator has knowledge of each of his creatures as shepherd knows his flock. The Greeks speak of the goddess Tyche in Latin, Fortuna. For the Greeks, there is blind faith according to the arbitrary will of a god, and the only virtue is tragic submission to the god's judgment. This is the central theme of Greek tragedy, for which there is no Jewish counterpart, even the book of Job. For Jews, the covenant with the Creator promotes confidence. For the faithful, there are rewards and safety. For Jews, there is no blind fate, no unjust punishment. However, should unmerited tragedy befall, Jews seek consolation in the Job-like awareness of mysteries beyond reckoning and occasionally the rabbinic concept of love suffering. We may feel isolated and unjustly afflicted, but we are always within the covenantal relationship with the Borei Olam, the creator of the universe, who is personally involved with and present in our isolation and dejection. The Jew's connection with the creator within this covenant is the foundation for the Jewish way of life, the bridge beyond isolation. For the Greeks, erotic love is dangerous, not simply in the biblical sense of deception. It is a divine madness. Indulging it is hubris, meaning excess, tragic excess, that threatens at any moment to plunge the lover into spirals of self-destruction, as in the case of Jason under the spell of Medea, or Agamemnon returning to Clytemnestra, or Oedipus in the arms of Jocasta. The tragic aspect of the Greek view of love requires that all erotic bonds be thoroughly restrained by tradition. Marriage is a family-mediated affair, a means of forming new clan alliances and begetting children. The Greek men emphasize friendship to relieve their isolation in conventional marriages, seeking intimate relationships between grown men of the higher classes or between youth and older men. For Greeks, the idea of friendship between men and women was unthinkable, except for two notorious examples from the classical period. Pericles, the great statesman, had an unusual friendship with the hetera, a courtesan, named Aspasia. And Socrates had a friendship with the Apollonian priestess Diotima, who taught him the art of love. For the Jews and Greeks alike, all forms of love are dangerous. They can produce family tensions as well as divided loyalties, not unlike those experienced in the friendship between David and Jonathan. Plato's dialogue, the symposium, like the Hebrew Bible, reveals the danger of love by presenting a series of flawed arguments to praise and explain it. In the final speech of the dialogue, Socrates narrates what he has learned about love from the priestess of Apollo, Diotima of Mantinea. He recites in her name a myth about the ladder of love, the ascent from the senses to the divine realm, where men and gods meet halfway. This ascent brings to mind the biblical ideal for love in Genesis 22, the Akedah, and in Deuteronomy 6:5, wherein each Jew is commanded to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Both the biblical and Greek views find in love directed to other human beings an inherently flawed, divisive, and even delusional experience. As presented in Socrates' account of the teaching of Diotima in the Symposium, love can only be elevated by an ascent midway between the human and the divine. Regarding friendship, the Greek solution for disciplined friendship is philosophy. It has its counterpart for Jews in the rabbinic emphasis on the love of Jewish scholars for the divine and through that commitment for one another. Jewish scholars are, one might say, the Jewish counterpart of the philosophers, members of a community of friends whose gaze is fixed on the highest things which Jews see as the divine laws, halakha. They sharpen techniques for reading the Hebrew Bible and rabbinic texts, deriving new halachot, divine laws, and insights into the divine threads that permeate reality and connect the heavens and the earth. As ordinary people, most of us experience simply flawed relationships. Paradoxically, our love can only be purified through the ascent we've talked about that leaves other human beings behind as we stand isolated before the face of the highest things, the creator of the universe. And now the conclusion. Isolation may seem an alien condition for those of us born to loving parents and warm families, but regardless of our situation, the human condition never allows us to completely escape isolation. It is our native land, the foundation of our human condition. Whether we are aware of it or not, it underlies all our perceptions, triggering longing for the presence of others, and even the most fulfilling relationships, family, friendship, or erotic love, can never undo our fundamental aloneness, our flawed understanding of love, or our vulnerability to self-deception, any more than we can evade our mortality. When our isolation doesn't overwhelm us, it imparts special feeling to all the joys and pleasures of this world, no matter how fleeting or deceptive they may be. Dunn's perception that our fundamental human connection, a relationship, comes with our awareness of this fundamental isolation is correct, but not as the foundation for human connection. Dunn's famous sermon is mere rhetoric, abstract and distancing. Contrary to Dunn, real relationship is found in active, sympathetic engagement with flesh and blood, meaning embodied experiences of the other. Real relationship exists only in experience, not through reflection or abstraction. By experience, I mean our engagement with others' suffering and joy. This approach to connection, a relationship, is not inconsistent with love and friendship, but neither is it the standard for love and friendship that we normally think of, both of which typically imply mutuality. It is the experience of the presence of our fellow human beings, freed of expectation, the attitude implied in the other Hebrew word for love, chesed, the elevation of human love through action into a good in itself. As it is said in Pirkei Avot 4:2, the standard is announced by Ben Azai. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. Now, this maxim may seem to be an austere and unfeeling standard, but it is in fact the standard of love revealed made possible within the direct experience of personal freedom, an experience that belongs uniquely to each of us in our isolation and solitude. This is the teaching of love rooted in the Akedah for all its horror and beauty and mystery. The Torah's insight into relationship derived from our common human ancestry, our inheritance of the accumulated failures and triumphs of a flawed and broken past. In the Torah's views, we live every moment as all human beings have always lived, at the crossroads of relationship and meaninglessness, symbolized in the name for the first victim of human disconnection, Hevel, meaninglessness. As Jews, we are called on to respond to meaninglessness within the framework of a providential covenant founded in love of the Creator, whether we meet that standard or not. Regardless how conceived, the covenant reveals the half-truth regarding isolation and its attendant sense of meaninglessness. We are reminded that isolation is not our only native land. In isolation, our hearts long for the other native land, the one symbolized by the image of the verdant garden, for it too is close at hand. The Torah's path to that desired end is neither ritual nor idea. It is a covenant cut in the heart's flesh, as repeated over and over in Torah and the prophets, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, meaning the circumcision of the heart. The heart that is tested, circumcised, and experienced, as Abraham's in the Akedah, is the path of relationship and the restoration of Chava's first view in the garden. It is the opening through which deep human connection may flow. It seems remote because isolation, with its danger of meaninglessness, or its promise of the most elevated love, as in the Akedah, is always close at hand. Both Adam's and Chava's first views of the world are reminders that we do not exclusively belong to one place or the other. We are blessed with freedom, and through freedom with love, both above and below, in sanctifiable connection with our fellows. There is no shortcut, no abstraction, no ritual for us to realize it. There are only the connections that we make for ourselves as we work to elevate our brief time on this earth, navigating the narrow places between our two native lands. And that's it.
Wow, Reid. As usual, you have my head spinning, and rather than take advantage of hosting the questions and answer period, I'll just have you to the side of my pool on the patio, and I'll bring you my questions then. But are there questions? Man, did you cover a lot of territory? Well, no. Well, I have a bunch. Are you sure there are no questions?
Can I comment?
Please.
Ed Forrest. I just want to say that I'm not sure the word casual is right. Perhaps the word convenient is better. But the fact that Abraham gives up his wife to the first strong man he meets in Israel to save his life, the selected person by God, but nevertheless he fears for his life and gives up his wife to save his life. I think that says something about the relationship between a man and a woman in the Bible. And so I find that to be odd, because the opposite of that is the relationship between us and God. Because as Maimonides points out, it's important to love God, to truly feel and experience the Jewish ways, the mitzvah. And so, but that love of God is a lonely God. It's a loneliness, because it's something you really can't share with anyone else. It's what you personally feel toward God, each of us in his own way. So on the one hand, where love is emphasized in the Bible, there's a loneliness connected with it. And on the other hand, the relationship between a woman and a man is casual or convenient. And that's bad. That's the only comment I really want to make.
I think that's a very insightful summary of the problems with all relationships, all human relationships. And the Greeks tried to solve it with a focus on truth, and the Jews tried to do it with the love of God. Gail, were you going to say something?
Well, we do have a question that's connected from Danny Haley. She's comments read that you speak about lust as perhaps a bad thing, but it seems like an important part of human relationships. I mean, we sort of need it, don't we? I mean,
absolutely, and I stand with the rabbis. I believe is it Pirkei Avot where it says without the erotic impulse, there would be no families and no Torah, no decency. That we build in this life on the flawed foundations of our humanity, but as partial cure, we have to root our ultimate values in the highest things. And I gave examples for those who are open to the love of God as a possibility, and others for whom the love of truth is a possibility. And then for those for whom both are possibilities, because they are all tied together, and that is the mysterious foundation of our whole Western sense of things, and is what distinguishes the West, I think. It makes other cultures and civilizations scratch their head. It's very, very difficult to move from Eastern thinking, and I'm referring now to, for example, to Confucian thinking, to this. There are some parallels, and we can talk about them, but they have not moved together in the way that Greek and Jewish thought have.
what about God? Is it good for God to be alone or not?
I think that you would have a lot more to say, and a lot wiser ways of talking about that, because I know that is it's a reflection that comes from Hasidus and from your own meditations on philosophy of relationship.
Yeah, other questions or comments? We're close to the end of our hour here.
I think Luis and the rabbi were both.
Luis, go ahead.
Okay. In a very simple way, one lesson that I take from this incredible lecture is something that, in a way, I've seen in other writers and other thinkers, but I think it's something that is profoundly Jewish, which is this, and I'd like your response, Reid. It's only the love of God that makes friendship possible. That's the remark.
I think that is the Jewish teaching. I think that is why the only friendship is for Jews as it is with Greeks. The Greeks have the philosophers, and among Jews, it's the Torah scholars, because the common work is founded in love of truth or love of the creator of the universe, who gives the laws that regulate life. And therefore we come to love the law. A big theme in Plato too. And one of the reasons why the rabbis and the philosophers often found themselves in agreement, but neither of them needed the other. They pursued their own thing and they were sufficient.
Thank you, Luis. Excellent question, as always. Maybe you and Reid can come to my patio sometime soon.
I look forward.
Rabbi Cohen, let me turn this back to you or you for your question and your concluding remarks.
Well, all I can say is I'm in love, Reid. I mean, really, that was an unbelievable teaching, a most phenomenal lecture. And, I love the way you built on the word na, and nun aleph. Na means please. It can mean I beg you, I plead with you. And we use it in so many ways and in so many cases. For instance, in the grace after meal, which we recite hopefully after each meal, there is a section which is called Rachem Na. In other words, Rachem, we ask God to have mercy, but just not Rachem, please have mercy upon Yerushalayim Recha, upon Jerusalem and Zion, thy city. And there's so many places where the word na is mentioned in connection with our needing God's love, especially. One thing that comes to mind really in the Torah is when Moses is praying on behalf of his sister, Miriam, who was afflicted with leprosy after speaking Lashon Hara, after speaking ill of her brother Moses, for supposedly having an affair with a Cushite woman. And it was a very simple but a very powerful way of Moses asking God to heal her. And he said, El na. The word na is twice there. El na refa na la. Please, God, please heal her. And that's the most powerful, really, asking or beseeching of God. We have it many, many ways and many, many times. But the word na is really, and I love the way you built on it, and I like the way you explained it. And it's interesting. At the end, we spoke, I think it was Danny who spoke about the difference between lust and love. And you mentioned Pirkei Avot. And Pirkei Avot clearly says, really, that there is an ahava shetuya badavar. There is a conditional love, which is really lust. And then there's an ahava she'eina tluya badavar. There is an unconditional love, which is true love. And Pirkei Avot gives as an example the ahava she'eina tluya badavar, the unconditional love is the love that existed between David and Jonathan. That was pure love, really. And ahava she'tluya badavar, and Pirkei Avot lists gives an example for a lust or a love that is conditional, the love of Amnon and Tamar, which was purely built upon lust and not love. So there is, the Kotzker Rebbe, as you know, David speaks a whole lot about love, the difference between love and lust. And in fact, he had a whole discourse with his Hasidim about it. We'll talk about it. I'll come to your patio as well, and at your poolside, and we'll talk about it. But meanwhile, I got to tell you, this was an unbelievable teaching. And thank you so much. A hearty shikoach to you, Reid, for sharing of your great knowledge with us, your teachings and your wisdom. And we wish, all of us wish you that you should continue in your avodat hakodesh, in your sacred service, your sacred work of teaching to this community and our communities for many, many years to come. Chazak ve'emat, you should go from chayil el chayil, from strength to strength, and we all love you. My friends, please join us on April the 25th for our 6th and last lecture in this series of lectures. And you have it on the screen, by the way. You have it on the screen, April the 25th the master himself, actually the creator of this lecture series, Dr. David Pedersen, our Dr. David Pedersen, will speak of the essence of anti-Semitism. The essence of anti-Semitism. Please do yourselves a favor and join us on April the 25th at 1 o'clock, at 1 p.m., when Dr. Pedersen will present this lecture on the essence of anti-Semitism, a very timely lecture indeed. If you loved, I'm sure that you loved, not if, I'm sure you loved our lecture series and all of our distinguished speakers. And if your heart moves you and you'd like to contribute to a congregation Nishmat Am specifically, so we can continue this, as I said, sacred service, please send whatever contribution it is to our synagogue, and I think the address is below, or we will furnish you with any information you need, God bless you. Thank you all for being with us. God bless you, and I'll see you in Yirtzeh Hashem, God willing, on April the 25th, when Dr. David Pedersen presents his lecture. God bless you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.